But Jerry, what are your tips? And then could you please plug yourself?
Okay. First of all, but let's start with the most simple. If you're having trouble with your appetite, drink about a 12, excuse me, drink about a 12-ounce glass of water immediately prior to a meal.
You need some water. Jesus.
I know. And when I talk too much, my throat tightens up a little bit. But anyway, the second thing, be more conscious when you're eating. In other words, don't wolf the food down. I mean, it's maybe a little bit extreme to put the fork down between each bite, but at least, take time to eat and keep in mind that it takes 20 minutes for your brain to detect that you're eating food. If you give your brain a chance to detect it, your appetite will decrease and you'll eat less. Consider having maybe some whey protein in proximity to a meal. The whey protein also has an appetite suppressant. Any type of protein has an appetite suppressant. Also, make sure that your meals include some form of fiber, soluble fiber. There's two kinds, insoluble and soluble. Insoluble fiber is the type that neither one of them digest, but insoluble fiber, that's the kind that helps you go to the bathroom. In other words, helps prevent constipation. Insoluble is the one that the intestinal microbiome, that's their food, that will not only fill you up when you're eating, but by feeding the intestinal microbiome, it'll help you, again, control your appetite and actually control your body composition. So those are the most important things.
Hello and welcome to Castle's Corner. I'm, of course, Coach Castle, joined today again by Mr. Jerry. You all know him. There's not many people in this industry that don't know Jerry. He's written literally over 1,000 articles. He has an amazing website, appliedmetabolics.com. He is the guru everybody knows, and he's back to help us out with fat loss today. We're going to be talking about fat loss and why the best tool is probably not what you think it is. So hi, Jerry, and welcome back.
How you doing? Good to see you again.
Oh, always happy to talk. You know that I love chatting with like-minded people. So much fun. But anyways, I know we're both a little pressed for time, so let's try to keep it short. Can you tell me, I just talked about fat burners with Bill Campbell, just had that podcast. And in the podcast, I addressed a question a lot of people have. And the answer I typically give is not the one they expect. And for losing fat, in my opinion, one of the best things you can do is actually sleep a lot. And some other things as well we'll get into, but would you mind talking why sleep is so important for fat loss?
Well, as you you have certain, let's say, proteins that are produced in the body. One of them is called leptin. Leptin is what they call what is it called again? I forgot the exact term. Adipokine. It's adipokine, meaning that it's a protein released from fat cells. Now, fat cells, known scientifically as lipocytes, they release over 100 different substances. For years, everyone thought fat cells were these dormant, basically energy storage tissues in the body that really didn't do much. It didn't look good. There was a suggestion that, it was associated with diabetes, cardiovascular disease, but basically they thought that fat cells were dormant. In the last, let's say 25, 30 years, research showed that they are far from dormant. Fat cells are actually kind of endocrine organs like the thyroid, the testes. They release their own kind of hormonal-like substances, again, collectively called adipokines. Now, one of the adipokines, probably the most famous, is called leptin. Leptin was discovered back around 1998. And at the time, I don't know if you were old enough to remember this, but it created a tremendous explosion in the scientific world and and it was released to the media because they showed that if you gave it to obese rats, if you injected the obese rats with leptin, basically all the fat on their body disappeared. And they came out with all these headlines in the popular press: cure for obesity found. And everybody had this idea that, well, we can start eating pizza and French fries. All we have to do is take leptin, it'll be fine, right? So further research showed how leptin works. Leptin is basically a signal sent from the adipocytes. Adipocytes, fat. Well, let's call them fat cells, so people don't get confused.
Keep it simple, yeah.
Fat cells. Yeah, scientifically, lipocytes. We'll call it fat cells. The fat cells secrete leptin when basically they're more or less filled. In other words, when there's enough triglyceride or energy stored, the leptin signal is sent to the brain, the appetite center in the brain, and there's several of them, but it basically decreases the appetite because your body senses it doesn't need a lot to eat, a lot more calories to support whatever it needs to do. So it's an appetite signal. Now we have to segue. Oh, I should further, just to finish the thought. Unfortunately, with leptin, all these headlines, the cure for obesity, I still remember that. What further research showed that contrary to what they believe, obese people actually produce more leptin. They're not deficient in it. They overproduce it because the body is trying to get a signal through to the brain that there's plenty of fat here. The problem with obese people is that the leptin signal to the brain doesn't get through. It's like trying to make a telephone call where the person can't hear you. And that's the problem. So the leptin, it's a vicious cycle. The leptin, having the abnormal levels of leptin, it's a kind of an appetite stimulant. It keeps these people hungry. They continue to eat, and it perpetuates obesity, right? So that's leptin. Now, there are certain people, now these certain humans actually are deficient. It's rare, but certain humans are deficient in leptin. And if you give them leptin, it has to be an injection because it's a protein. You can't take it orally; it'll be broken down in the gut. If you inject leptin into these people who are deficient, just like the rats, their body fat practically disappears. But the key point is these people are deficient. Most people who are with a lot of body fat are not deficient, just the opposite. Now, we have to look at another protein. This one's called ghrelin. Ghrelin is an interesting substance because, among other things, a lot of people don't know this about ghrelin. It's actually a ligand for growth hormone receptors, meaning for years, scientists, they knew about growth hormone, but, they didn't, most hormones work by interacting with receptors. And they weren't sure if growth hormone had these receptors. And then they found out that the growth hormone does have receptors. And ghrelin, it turns out, is a direct receptor for growth hormone, meaning ghrelin can actually stimulate growth hormone release. Now, taking that into account, scientists started to develop drugs called growth hormone secretagogues. These are short chains of amino acids. The original ones were almost identical to ghrelin. They look just like ghrelin. And just like ghrelin, when you took it, they stimulated your own, let's say you weren't kicking out enough growth hormone, maybe you're a little older. If you took a growth hormone secretagogue, it would bypass the somatic, I don't want to get into too much technical detail, but it bypasses the usual blockages that prevent the secretion of growth hormone by the pituitary gland. And you would take these growth hormone secretagogues and they would bypass that, and you would actually kick out growth hormone to the extent where you would actually normalize your growth hormone output. Now, what does that have to do with appetite? Ghrelin, besides doing that, it also, when you eat a meal, your body is always kind of producing ghrelin, right? But when you eat a meal, the ghrelin, if you were to graph it, it goes all the way down. In the hours after the meal, the ghrelin gradually builds up. And as it builds up, your hunger increases. Because ghrelin, and this is a key point, ghrelin is the key appetite stimulating protein produced in the body. Ghrelin is what makes you hungry. And among other things, they think it's nature's way of keeping you from, to keep you to eat so you don't die of starvation. It's like an automatic process. Now, what does all this have to do with sleep and body fat? Well, turns out when you don't get enough sleep, leptin goes down, which would stimulate your appetite, and ghrelin goes up. Now, what does that mean in practical terms? What it means is if you don't get enough sleep, you're fighting against yourself because it's going to give you a voracious appetite. You're going to have the willpower of like superhuman willpower to overcome the cravings for food. But because of that, you're going to wind up eating more calories and you're going to get fat. And there's a secondary factor also from lack of sleep. Besides the ghrelin and leptin effect, when you don't get enough sleep, and this goes for anybody. Now, that's something called insulin insensitivity. This is considered pre-diabetes. They call it pre-diabetes because without going again into too much technical detail, what happens is the cells, or particularly fat cells, they become insensitive to insulin, And, eventually that could lead to type 2 diabetes. It is very treatable. Being insulin insensitive doesn't mean that you're doomed to get diabetes. You can control it by proper diet and exercise. But here's the point. Normal people who have no trace of genetic diabetes, nothing like that. If they go without one night of sleep, let's say they go decide they only can get 3 or 4 hours sleep, right? The next day they will be insulin insensitive, just like somebody heading for diabetes. What does that mean? That by being insulin insensitive, they're going to secrete a little bit more insulin than they normally do. And one of the main functions of insulin, besides pushing glucose into cells, is to stop all processes that are related to fat oxidation, and also to promote fat accretion in lymphocytes of fat cells. So that's a secondary way that a lack of sleep can induce body fat.
Well, I would also say too, there's a lot of other problems with lack of sleep. I mean, we could get into it, but I don't think it's a podcast for that. I mean, your testosterone drops considerably. If you're
That's
natural, I won't get into it, but there's a lot of issues with not sleeping. Of course, many, many, many. It's probably about the worst thing you can do is not sleep an adequate 5 or 6 cycles a night. A sleep cycle, again, just for you guys who don't know, it's 90 minutes, 4 full cycles of REM sleep. That's a full sleep cycle, and you should be timing your sleep so you don't wake up in the middle of one of these. Just real quick, FYI. The next thing I wanted to chat about is actually eating. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I don't mean there's something real quick that I have to add before we leave the sleep thing.
Yeah.
Is that they discovered something the last couple of years. There's this system in the brain called the glymphatic system. Just like the lymph circulates, it turns out that your cerebral spinal fluid at night actually enters the brain, and it clears out all the crap and protein derivatives and debris that you accumulate during the day. It's almost like a sweeping of the brain. And you have to go into a deep sleep cycle. You mentioned sleep cycles. It only works when you go into deeper sleep cycles, and you have to have several sleep cycles for the glymphatic system to work. And then what that equals is at least 7 hours of sleep a night. Now, what they think, if the glymphatic system isn't properly activated, those abnormal proteins and garbage accumulate in the brain, and it leads to things like Alzheimer's disease and brain degeneration. Just wanted to mention that because it's very important.
I was actually reading a lot about that a couple months ago, and yeah, the evidence really seems to suggest that lack of sleep leads to all of, just about everything you can think of that's on a bad list. Lack of sleep contributes to that, basically. But the next thing I'll talk about when it comes to fat loss is something else I talk about all the time. I'll just address one little piece of it, but then send it over to you, and that's how you eat, actually, like the actual way that you're eating. So just real quick, I'm going to address this. It might sound strange, but from a respiratory perspective, you actually really, really want to chew your food thoroughly. I won't get too much into details. I have other videos about this, but it's really important to spend time chewing your food. I'm sure you'll get to that in a moment. It's important for many reasons, but one of the primary things is, as modern humans, we have very small mouths and our teeth are overcrowded. This is primarily due to being vertical breathers and mouth breathers, which is not good for health. Let's just put it that way. I would just refer you guys to check out my other videos about that. It's a nationwide epidemic. I mean, it's a worldwide epidemic, I would even say. People breathing improperly with all of these dental issues, and it leads to bad posture. It leads to many things. But just in regards to just fat loss and trying to lose fat efficiently, why does how you're chewing, how you're eating, why does it make a difference?
Okay, to begin with, I got to give you a little kind of anecdote. At the turn of the 20th century, there was a guy named Fletcher who came out with a system that came to be known as Fletcherism. What was Fletcherism? Very simple. This guy Fletcher came up with a theory that you have to chew each morsel of food 100 times. 100 times each morsel of food. His theory was if you chewed the food that much, of course, it becomes almost like liquid when you do that. It improved digestion and improved every aspect of the body, cardiovascular health. Now, at first, people thought this was ridiculous and he was laughed at. But this guy was doing things that scientists at the time couldn't explain. Like, for example, when he was like something like 80, 90 years old, he was doing physical feats. I don't remember them offhand, but they're things that most 90-year-olds would not even consider doing. I mean, he seemed like a superhuman. Okay, he's one guy, so it's anecdotal, but he actually, it became almost like a cult in the early 20th century. A bunch of people started doing what they call Fletcherism. They started chewing their food very thoroughly, and sure enough, a lot of these people's health improved. Why did their health improve? It's hard to say, but one theory is this, and this they didn't know this at the time. A lot of people don't know. It takes about 20 minutes for your brain to detect that to get the message that you're eating food. If you wolf your food down, you're going to wind up eating more because you're not giving the brain, the appetite center, a chance to detect the fact that you're taking in calories and food. If you slow down, then the appetite center in the brain will get the message, and guess what? The appetite decreases, and you'll wind up eating less. So my theory is that people that engage in Fletchers, and this became a big thing. The president of the United States, the big fat guy named William Howard Taft, he even tried Fletcherism, and he actually lost weight on it. Later on, he went on a low-carb diet, which actually caused him to lose about 80 pounds. And we're talking like 1911 or so, But anyway, I believe that the chewing the food, the Fletcherism, it worked because your brain was getting the appetite-lowering signal. They wound up eating less. When you eat less, you get the benefits of calorie reduction, which is better insulin sensitivity, less body fat, everything, higher testosterone. It all adds up to greater health. And they showed, and I wrote about this in Bodybuilding years ago. I wrote about a series of studies done by Japanese researchers where they had subjects. They had two groups. One group ate normally at a normal eating pace, let's say. The other group, every time they took let's say a fork of food, they had to put down their fork each time, every time. So they ate about 4 times slower than the other group. Now, here's the key point. Both groups consumed the same exact number of calories, but the people that put the fork down between each bite lost about 40% more body fat, even though they took in the same amount of calories. Now, they didn't really have an explanation for that.
Well, I mean, if I'm actually interject real quick, I don't know if you know who James Nestor is, but he's the one who first actually turned me on to all of this bit about chewing and the importance of it. But when you're chewing, actually, you're releasing stem cells, and when you're chewing, you're using your muscles, etc. But you're having a profound impact upon everything from your respiratory system to your actual posture to how you're digesting the food, because the more you mix it with saliva, I mean, well, you know a lot about this, anyways, but I suppose the next thing I'd like to ask you about is cholecystokinins and maybe the peptide YY and glucolike peptide 1 and stuff like that. How do those anti-hunger peptides rather come into play and enzymes?
Okay, these are what they call gut peptides, and they are released in response to a meal. Now, you mentioned cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin is correlated with bile flow. And the thing that stimulates bile flow is fat. For example, you have the fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, and K. To properly absorb, they're called fat-soluble because they only dissolve or can only be absorbed in the presence of fat. So if you want the full absorption of vitamin A, D, E, and K, you have to have a little bit of fat. You don't have to eat a pound of peanut butter. Maybe a tablespoon of pat of butter is enough. But the key, what you were trying to do is stimulate the bile flow. When you stimulate the bile flow, you also stimulate cholecystokinin. Cholecystokinin, similar to leptin, but in a different way, has an appetite suppressing effect. So your appetite, this is why I've noticed all my life that the thing that satiates me more than any type of food is fat. In other words, when I eat fat, it reduces my appetite much more than protein or carbohydrates. I can never figure out why. At first, I thought, well, maybe it's because fat has 2.5 times more calories than protein and carbs. I thought it might be, but that wasn't it. It turns out it's the cholecystokin release caused by fat that causes. Anytime I eat fat, my appetite is dead for a couple hours there. And it's now peptide YY, that's related to carbohydrate intake. In other words, when peptide YY is, let's say, low, You're going to get a greater craving for carbohydrates. And in some cases, unfortunately for most people, that means eating refined carbohydrates, refined sugars, which are probably next to trans fats, the worst thing you could possibly eat. They're absolute garbage with no redeeming qualities. They cause every possible disease, related to every possible disease, from cancer to cardiovascular disease. So these are basically, to sum it up, I mean, there's other ones like glucagon, like peptide 1. As a matter of fact, an interesting thing about that, they came out with some drugs to treat type 2 diabetes, oral drugs, and they know that glucagon, like peptide 1, works similar to insulin. People don't know that insulin actually reduces the appetite. If you when you get eat a meal and you get an insulin release, the insulin also turns off the appetite center of the brain. This is why fructose is so dangerous, because is it fructose or fructose? I always get the pronunciation.
Tomato. I actually go back and forth.
Oh, well, let's call it fructose to make people happy. Yeah. Anyway, one of the reasons why fructose is so bad is, unlike other sugars, it doesn't stimulate an immediate insulin reaction. The brain doesn't get the message to turn off the appetite, and you wind up eating too much fructose, which can be very rapidly converted to triglyceride, especially in the liver, and you get fat. See, so the thing is that glucagon, like 1 peptide, works similar to insulin in that it lowers the appetite. So these drugs and it also helps to lower blood glucose like insulin. That's why they came out with glucagon like 1 analogs, they call it. These drugs have various names. I can't even pronounce some of them, to be honest with you. But anyway, they're very expensive, and they're given out. If you don't have to use insulin, a lot of diabetics get these. They're for people that maybe metformin doesn't work as well, and they can't, follow a diet properly. But here's the interesting thing: a couple of these drugs, they notice, had a tremendous effect at reducing body fat. In other words, that was a side effect they didn't expect, and they're still not sure. They think it has something to do with, again, lowering the appetite. But there's one that was so potent in this effect that they're now remarketing it as a appetite and obesity drug. I can't remember the name of it. You could look it up. It's one of the glucagon like 1 secreted analogs. They're going to remarket as a obesity because it caused a significant loss of body fat. I'm not talking 1 to 2 pounds. I'm talking like 12, 15 pounds within about 3 weeks, which is considered very significant.
I'm going to have to look into that. I didn't have any idea about that, actually.
Yeah.
Well, it actually leads me into my next question, though, is what appetite suppressants, do you have any you would recommend that people take?
Quite a few, actually. I personally, even though I just talked about, this is going to sound a little paradoxical, even though I just kind of raved about this drug that apparently is very effective for producing body fat. It also, one side effect, which would keep me from ever using it, is a possible promoter of pancreatic cancer, which is the #1 most fatal type of cancer. It doesn't mean it's going to cause it, but it has a slight association. Anything that could have anything to do with pancreatic cancer, I will have nothing to do with, because that is almost always the most fatal type of cancer you can get. But besides that, my point being, I like to keep away. I won't use any drugs. I don't recommend drugs. Like the doctors, as I said, most of the weight loss drugs doctors give out are what they call anorexic drugs. They basically are kind of, some of them are like amphetamine-like drugs. They work by turning off the appetite. There's always side effects. Oh, there's no drug. Any pharmacologist will tell you, a drug without side effects is a drug that doesn't work. They all have side effects. So I say go to the natural. Let's talk about a couple of natural ones. Whey protein. Whey protein actually has an insulin-like effect. They've shown in recent studies, if you take whey protein in proximity to the meal, it actually has an insulin-like effect, and it potently lowers the appetite. And they've shown this in diabetics. And normal people, it probably work even better. Any kind of protein. One of the reasons why low carbohydrate diets are so successful at weight loss is not just the lack of carbohydrates and the insulin lowering effect. It's the fact that they're always high in protein. Protein has a satiety effect. Amino acids lower the appetite. So eating a higher protein diet will control the appetite. Another thing and this is something a lot of people overlook, which I think is really good for controlling appetite, is dietary fiber. Dietary fiber works in two ways. Not only does it provide a filling effect, so if you're full, you're not going to want to eat as much. You're not going to take as many calories. You're going to lose body fat. Secondarily, and this is something they didn't know years ago, more importantly about dietary fiber is that it's especially soluble dietary fiber, which is stuff like the fiber in beans and fruit and oatmeal. That type of fiber acts as a direct, let's call it food, for the organisms that reside in the colon, collectively called the intestinal microbiome. Now, what's the significance of that? The intestinal microbiome, this is unbelievable. You're not going to believe this. Not only do they secrete substances like short-chain fatty acids, butyrate, propionic acid, acetate, that directly lower the appetite, but they also actually secrete, they promote growth hormone release, which helps with body fat, and they produce several other substances, these bacteria, that actually help to lower body fat. The intestinal microbiome also adjusts how much carbohydrate, protein, and fat you're able to absorb. Now, all this comes, if you want to get these benefits, you got to eat dietary fiber, because that's what fuels the intestinal microbiome. That's why I have a beef with these people that push carnivore, the carnivore diet, which is basically almost pure protein. There's almost no fiber. They're lucky if they get 10, 20 grams. No, I'm not even, when I talking 20 grams, they're lucky if they get 5 grams of fiber, because protein foods are not high in fiber. You got to eat fruits, vegetables, like I said, legumes, oatmeal, that kind of thing. Or if you have a lot of trouble eating those foods, you'd have to take, let's say, good fiber supplements, psyllium, guar gum, apple pectin. I take a combination of all of myself every day, because I'm very aware of the importance of fiber. I don't believe I get enough in my diet, so I aim to get about 50, 60 grams of fiber a day, and I'm doing it, believe it or not, for that intestinal microbiome.
I just want to interject real quick and actually say as real quick, some of the things that you've said, it's always astonishing to me kind of how the old wives' tales, have some truth in them even before the science proves them. I mean, I remember growing up, attempting to become a bodybuilder, etc. For years, I would always have a protein shake before every meal, and that's because it would give me more protein and it would actually keep me from being full. I still carry that on, by the way. Before I go to a restaurant, I have a shake before I go, so I don't order, 5 entrees. But something else I wanted to mention about the micro.
Before you go, 1 second. I just wanted to give one little quick tip that is so simple, it almost seems ludicrous, but it actually has a fairly significant appetite lowering effect. If before a meal, you just reminded of it what you just said. Before a meal, if you drink about a 8 to 12 ounce glass of water right before you drink the meal, it'll get this, it'll reduce your appetite by as much as 40%. Why? And this is again startling to understand this. When you drink water like that, a glass of cold water before a meal, it immediately sends a signal that stimulates the release of catecholamines, epinephrine, norepinephrine. These are the same substances that so-called fat burners try and kick out, and also ephedrine kicked out. One of the effects of these catecholamines is to lower your appetite, and it works fast. Drinking a glass of water right before a meal, it'll lower your appetite very fast. That's a little trick. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh, but that's another actually old wives' tale they used to say is, to have a glass of water before the food too. But I was just going to mention something else about the microbiome is a lot of people also have trouble getting fiber. A lot of my clients have difficulty getting enough protein and enough fiber. So I actually recommend eat lots of popcorn. It's one of the best things you can do. There are certain brands of popcorn. I mean, I have videos again about this kind of stuff, but like there's certain brands that have almost no calories, but they're basically all fiber. So it's a really great way to eat, to feel full, to have a snack, it doesn't mean cover it in butter, but to have a snack and something while you're watching a movie. And then the second thing I wanted to ask about in regards to the microbiome, because again, I know you probably know about this as well, but the effects of sugar on it. So what happens when you actually eat sugar, and why is that such a really bad idea to keep feeding it sugar?
Okay. The intestinal microbiome, as I said earlier, it's basically the number of organisms there vary depending on which text or article you read. Some of them say there's more organisms residing in the microbiome than there are cells in the body. It's like having a whole different person involved in living in your body. But here's the point. There has to be a balance. There's good bacteria and bad bacteria there. Now, normally, to be healthy, you want to emphasize the good bacteria. These are the things that give you the benefits of the microbiome, such as the production of short-chain fatty acids. To promote the good bacteria, again, that requires a good amount of dietary fiber. Also, what they call probiotic or prebiotics, stuff like kombucha tea, yogurt. These things also act as food for these good organisms. Now, what happens when you eat refined sugars and let's say too much saturated fat? I'm not even going to talk about trans fat because most people, they've cut down on trans fat, so I don't think that's a big issue anymore. But let's say eat a lot of saturated fat. Saturated fat may not be as bad as they used to think for the cardiovascular. That's more or less been disproven that that saturated fat gives you heart attacks. It does only in certain people who have genetic polymorphism, to say. But the point being that saturated fat, unfortunately, is not that great for the intestinal when you eat too much of it. It promotes the kind of buildup of the bad bacteria. Same with refined sugars. When you get a buildup of the bad bacteria, it can actually outnumber the good bacteria. So now you have what they call dysbiosis. That's the medical term for an imbalance of bacteria in the microbiome, which is antithetical to good health. When that happens, you're going to have all kinds of medical problems, and even the doctors are going to be scratching. Nobody's going to be able to figure out what it is. Even worse, when you eat these kind of foods, you can get something called the leaky gut syndrome. I don't know if you ever heard of that. Basically, you have these in your gut, you have these cells that are what they call tight junction. They're very tight. They prevent the entry of, let's say, organisms from the colon to get into the body, into the bloodstream, because if they get into the bloodstream, that can cause a lot of problems. An example of this, and probably the most predominant example, is a byproduct of when the microbes break down, they release a substance called lipopolysaccharides, or LPO. That's a combination of fat and sugar, and it's in the membrane of the bacteria. As they break down, that's released. Now, if it stays in the colon, there's no problem. It'll eventually kind of be wiped out. If you have leaky gut syndrome, however, the LPS can get into your body, into your blood, and once there, it's a foreign substance, and it can cause, it's just like being invaded by pathological bacteria that causes all kinds of problems. In fact, I wrote an article in my Applied Metabolics publication a couple of years ago of a theory that a gradual increase of lipopolysaccharides can actually damage the testes and cause low testosterone in older men. It's a theory. It hasn't been proven, but it's a theory. That's just one example. But when this stuff gets in your blood, it's very dangerous. And eating refined sugars and bad fat encourages, again, the buildup of the bad bacteria, who actually produce more lipopolysaccharides, and also it causes a kind of defect where you get that leaky gut syndrome that just can ruin your health completely.
Also, I should just mention as well, in regards to the microbiome, it's actually considered a second brain nowadays. It's literally considered
That's
a
right.
second brain of the human body. It is linked directly to your actual brain. And lots of times when you have hunger cravings, it might not even be ghrelin. Maybe you had a chocolate cake, and now those bacteria, well, they multiplied and they grew with that chocolate cake, and now they want more so they can keep multiplying and stay alive. And that second brain of yours might literally make you go to the store or the cupboard or wherever and shove some sugar in your face to keep feeding them, because it's literally a second brain. Do you want to chat about that real quick? It's kind of interesting, I think.
About the what?
Do you want to talk about that real quick? It's just pretty interesting to me, I think, how your gut can affect your.
Yeah, no, that is a fact. A lot of scientists refer to the microbiome as the second brain. And I would add to what you just said, the let's say the short chain fatty acids also affect those gut peptides that I mentioned earlier. They could actually lower ghrelin and help control leptin, and that as a secondary way. Now, in the brain, one of the short chain fatty acids produced by the intestinal bacteria called butyrate. When it's stuff, by the way, it smells like rotting butter. It's got a terrible smell. But you know, it's in the yeah, you know, if you ever smelled it, it would make you vomit. It's a horrible smell. But you never notice it because it normally stays in the body. But it's good stuff. Despite the fact that it stinks, it's good stuff. When it gets in the brain, this I found fascinating. One of the theories of what causes Alzheimer's is a buildup of abnormal folded proteins related to beta amyloid 42 and tau, TAU. Now, when these things accumulate, you get as I said, you get neurofibrillary tangles, and you get these other problems that basically are the basis of Alzheimer's disease. That theory has been called into question lately. I'm not going to get into that, but what the interesting part is when butyrate gets into the brain. Remember I talked about how the lymphatic system clears out those abnormal proteins? Guess what? Butyrate does the same thing. It actually helps to break down the abnormal proteins, and in that way, it can actually help keep your brain in shape, maybe prevent degenerative brain disease, and more importantly, it will prevent memory problems. You know how a lot of people, when they get older, they get what they call senior moments and stuff like that. They're not senile, but they're having a little brain deficit there, you know, and this stuff might, by keeping your brain working and keeping your neurons in sharp working order, it'll prevent all that stuff. And I also want to mention one thing real quick because it just came to mind. There's another substance in the brain called insulin. Well, not in the brain everywhere, but in the brain, this stuff is called insulin degrading hormone. And as the name implies, what it does is it degrades insulin in the brain. Because insulin does get in the brain, it helps break down, but it does a secondary thing. It also breaks down those abnormal proteins. And there's a theory among neurologists that people that are not controlling their blood glucose or eating too many refined sugars, the insulin degrading protein of the brain doesn't get a chance to break down the abnormal proteins because it has too much insulin to deal with, and they think this would be called one of the causes of Alzheimer's disease. In fact, they refer to this as type 3 diabetes. So I thought that was interesting.
I didn't know that. That's actually really fascinating. Just out of curiosity, hopefully we won't go too deep into this, but have you seen all the latest research on psilocybin and preventing, brain degeneration and stuff? I'm fascinating by that. I've been digging for years. Fascinating.
You said you've been taking it or you've been reading it?
Well, I've actually been microdosing for the better part of 8 years now. It's a three-day on, 1 day off protocol. I mean, I'll keep it at that. But yeah, I noticed a massive difference in my mood. I noticed a difference in my intelligence, my creativity, my memory retention, my willingness to study, my willingness to read, experience new things, etc. But that's not for here nor there. But I mean, have you seen all the studies in regards to the brain degeneration?
I have seen it, and it's real. It's not a placebo effect. It really works. And as you point out, the key word is microdosing, small amounts, because psilocybin is a hallucinogen. Now, I've been tempted to try this myself because there's a protocol. I use a mushroom called lion's mane. I've been using it for quite a while. It stimulates a substance in the brain called nerve growth factor that also actually repairs nerves, keeps your neurons in shape, hopefully to prevent degenerative brain. I've been taking it for a long time. But there's a mushroom expert who has a protocol involving micro doses of psilocybin taken with lion's mane.
Paul Stamos, right? Paul Stamos.
What's his name?
Paul Stamos.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah,
I think that. But he apparently, what he claims is that this causes tremendous brain stimulation effect. And when I looked into the mechanisms behind it, I know lion's mane, I'm very familiar with, wasn't sure about psilocybin, but when I researched it, I said to myself, this could actually work. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't tried psilocybin, even in the microdose. And by the way, LSD in microdoses also does this very similar is as a brain. Again, microdoses. The reason why I'm a little hesitant is I had a very bad experience when I was 19. Somebody gave me a cookie. It was supposed to have marijuana in it. They used
Oh
to call
no.
them Alice Toklas cookies. Unfortunately, rather than marijuana, it was laced with a substance called angel dust,
Oh fuck.
which is a very powerful hallucinogen. It almost killed me. I had a horrible experience. One of the worst. I was actually schizophrenic for 3 days. I didn't know where I was. I was like in a dream state. I'll never forget that. One of the scariest parts, if not the scariest time. And I'm very, very nervous about hallucinogens. Even in my, I'm afraid to even take them. Probably nothing would happen, but I'm just a little bit paranoid about it.
Well, just real quick, I want to interject here because actually, I mean, I always hesitate to say this, but I know a considerable amount about these kinds of things. I have been experimenting for years. By the way, let's just call it macro dosing as well, up to 30 grams of psilocybin at a time. I've done DMT, I've done ayahuasca, everything you can think of. But I actually ended up doing several of those things, specifically psilocybin, and learning so much about psilocybin was to cure my schizophrenia and my bipolar disorder, is actually why I began researching it. And anybody who follows my podcast, I speak about this where I literally actually fixed myself using these chemical compounds. It was not easy. It was quite a painful and difficult process. But I just want to say, if you're microdosing, it's a very different thing. You don't actually feel anything. You don't notice anything. There's no hallucinations. There's nothing visual. In order to get something like that, you would need to be taking a minimum of like 1 gram of psilocybin. When you come to microdosing, it's a tenth of a gram. It's very small amounts. I mean, so just I don't want people to be worried hearing these kinds of things. And I would really refer people to Paul Stamos because I've been following his work for at least 5 years now. He's extremely knowledgeable. Lion's Mane, I take literally every day with, well, not every day because I take the Lion's Mane every day, but I microdose 3 days on, 1 day off. And I always take at the same time, as well as turkey tail mushrooms and a few others. I'll spare you the details, but they're very, very beneficial. I can testify to that as well. But
Right.
anyways,
Right.
side tangent. Why don't you could you wrap up with I guess some of your best appetite suppressant or fat loss tips, I guess, just kind of rapid fire. And then if you could, please, I really need you to plug yourself because guys, I want you to be going to his website. I want you to read his articles. They're so easy. Anybody can read them, even a dummy like me. So you guys got to check it out. But Jerry, what are your tips? And then could you please plug yourself?
Okay. First of all, but let's start with the most simple. If you're having trouble with your appetite, drink about a 12, excuse me, drink about a 12-ounce glass of water immediately prior to a meal.
You need some water. Jesus.
I know. And when I talk too much, my throat tightens up a little bit. But anyway, the second thing, be more conscious when you're eating. In other words, don't wolf the food down. I mean, it's maybe a little bit extreme to put the fork down between each bite, but at least, take time to eat and keep in mind that it takes 20 minutes for your brain to detect that you're eating food. If you give your brain a chance to detect it, your appetite will decrease and you'll eat less. Consider having maybe some whey protein in proximity to a meal. The whey protein also has an appetite suppressant. Any type of protein has an appetite suppressant. Also, make sure that your meals include some form of fiber, soluble fiber. There's two kinds, insoluble and soluble. Insoluble fiber is the type that kind of, neither one of them digest, but insoluble fiber, that's the kind that helps you go to the bathroom. In other words, helps prevent constipation. Insoluble is the one that the intestinal microbiome, that's their food that will not only fill you up when you're eating, but by feeding the intestinal microbiome, it'll help you, again, control your appetite and actually control your body composition. So those are the most important things, I think.
And sleep a lot.
Yeah, and oh yeah, absolutely.
Well, that's a biggie.
By the way, listen, this is important because I know you've seen this. I've seen a lot of videos. Unfortunately, I've seen an old friend of mine, Arnold. I've seen Arnold saying some of his speeches how I have so many things to do that I only average sleep 4 hours a day. No. 4 hours a day is death. Arnold is going to be in big trouble. He's already had some health problems. 4 hours a day is no one except let me add, there's some rare genetic freaks, and they are rare, They can get by on 4 to 5 hours sleep and retain their health, but they are rare. Most people need, and this is the point, they need at least 7 to 8 hours of sleep, maximum 10. If you start to go over 10, the sleep reverses itself and it starts to be deleterious to health. So there is such a thing as too much sleep. For most people, 7 hours is perfect. You get the benefits of the lymphatic system. And by the way, if you sleep on the right side of your body, your right side of the body, your lymphatic system works better because the cerebral spinal fluid can get into the brain easier. That's a little trick. But again, don't listen to these people. I've seen these, I only get 3 hours sleep and I feel, no, it's going to screw you up. These people don't know what they're talking about. In fact, when I watch a video, I'll be honest with you, when I watch a video and I see somebody, as soon as they say, well, I'm so busy, I only sleep three, I turn it off immediately. I don't want to hear anything else they say because they've already been showing themselves as idiots. I don't have time. I don't know about you. I don't have time to listen to idiots.
Well, I just addressed this the other day. I do a Sunday live, and one of the most frequent questions I get, I always answer, and it's you have to sleep more. And I mean, I'm a high performance coach. I specialize in efficiency. I specialize in you getting your shit done rapidly, getting results rapidly with your workouts, with your life, with your money, with everything. But the thing I say the most is you have to sleep enough. And that goes contrary to everybody else who's saying just sleep faster, less hours of sleep. Don't be such a bitch. Guess what? When you sleep more, you perform far better. You think better. You have memory retention. You learn faster. You're more creative. You're in a better mood. You have more energy. You have to prioritize your sleep, even if that means sacrificing something else. But by prioritizing your sleep, everything improves. It was actually probably the biggest thing that was holding me back from actually losing like the last bit of fat, you know what I mean, on me, was I was trying to get by with 5 or 6 hours of sleep back when I was a coach and I was a chef, and it was impossible to stay shredded. I was losing my mind, you know what I mean? And I couldn't understand it till I started sleeping more, and then it all stopped, all went away.
And not only that, well, let's say you have a athlete or bodybuilder who wants to build muscle. As you accurately pointed out, just let's say you take a 19-year-old guy. Now, at 19, you're at the peak of your natural testosterone production, the very peak at 19. If one of those guys, and they've shown this in studies, misses one night of sleep, let's say he gets 4 hours, the next day, his testosterone is 15 to 20% lower.
And the next day, too.
Yeah,
but it's still down.
Imagine how that affects them if they do that every day. Their gains are going to go down to nothing. You can't make gains without having proper testosterone levels.
I'm serious, guys. And on top of that, it depletes your willpower too. Just not sleeping, your willpower. I mean, it is actually a real thing. This is not a magical term. Willpower is a real word. You do have it. Some people naturally have more than others, but it's a muscle just like anything else. You have to train it. And if you don't sleep, your willpower is freaking shot. It's shot. You're going to be binging, you're going to be eating, and then you're going to be hating yourself for doing it. So just don't do it. But anyways, Jerry, please, could you send us to your website and all your links and everything? Please.
Let me talk a little bit. It's called Applied Metabolics. And, these days I refer to it as Applied Metabolics rather than Applied Metabolics Newsletter, because I never should have chosen the word newsletter. I don't know why I did that when I started it. Well, actually, I started back in the 90s, but the most recent reincarnation of it, if you want to call it that, was 8 years ago. But to me, a newsletter, in most people's mind, when they hear newsletter, they think of like these little 3 or 4 page things. They're little short. My thing is hardly that. If you're a subscriber, it's 30 to 50 pages every month. Applied Metabolics is for somebody like yourself who wants in-depth information where all the mechanisms are discussed. Everything you need to know about any particular topic is in that article. You don't have to read anything else. I cover the waterfront. Some of these articles, I actually read as many as 100 medical papers to make sure it's accurate. And I cover everything. I mean, there's something in that publication for everything. Women, I have articles for women. I also don't leave out older people, because I find that a lot of times, because this is a youth-oriented world, I mean, you go Instagram and youth, there's always these young people. I mean, they look like they're 20 years old. A lot of the people that are middle-aged and older are ignored. So I don't ignore them. I always have something in there that would be of special use to people that are, let's say, 40 and over, and because there's a dearth of information about training and nutrition for this population. And also, a lot of these people, they don't want to degenerate as they get older. They want to be as healthy and fit at 70 as they were at 40 or 30. And I discuss possible ways to do that. And there's no ads, there's no nothing. I'm not associated with any supplement company. I don't even like to mention product names because I'm not a shill. I'm not. If you want the 100% truth, you will read my Applied Metabolics because, there's, as you know, there's other digital publications out there, and I'm not saying they're bad. So I've seen a couple of them are devoted to training. You probably know some of these. They're excellent. They're written by guys who are very educated. They have PhDs and some MDs have publications. There's nothing. They're great. Don't get me wrong. But what they don't have that I have is 60 years in the trenches and constant study. And I believe, I don't think there's anyone that can match that. And academic learning is great. I'm not putting it down. Trust me. Having a great education, having attained a PhD, MD, that's terrific. But there's things you learn, through practical experience or empirically that are never taught in any academic institution. And that's what's incorporated in my Applied Metabolics. People will learn things that they will never could learn from any of these other people or anywhere else on the web. So I believe that anyone who reads Applied Metabolics will have enough knowledge. I think you might agree. Within 7 months, they will be kind of an expert themselves. That's how much in depth it is, and it's very inexpensive. I mean, it costs less. I was going to compare it to a newspaper, but I guess nobody reads newspaper.
That's not a point of that anymore. Yeah.
That's not a good analogy. Let's compare it to, let's say, a cup of latte at Starbucks. It's cheaper than getting a daily latte at Starbucks. And, it's the same price. I haven't raised the price since I started the publication. Anybody who reads it, they will learn. I'm telling you. I guarantee it. And some people, they might say, well, gee, it's so 30, 50 pages. Gee, I designed it, or I had it designed. It can be read on any media, tablets, phone, on your computer, you name it. And there's no law that says you have to read all 40 or 50 pages at once. Read it in chunks. Besides, as you know, I'm sure you know that you're a smart guy. When you read in chunks, you actually retain the material more. This is a good point for students. If you study in chunks, you retain more of the information than if you try to read it all at once. Mm-hmm. So that's the good way to do it. So the best I could say is, I guarantee, I wish personally, when I was involved in bodybuilding, when I was an athlete, I wish I had Applied Metabolics because I would have avoided a lot of the mistakes that I made.
This is exactly why I do what I do. I just sent you a copy of my new 75-page book. I just finished.
I got it. I'm going to read that.
You're busy.
As soon as I read it, I'll give you some feedback. I promise.
Yeah. But you already know most of the stuff in there, I would think. Maybe something new about respiratory or biomechanics you didn't know. But the reason I make these things, the reason I make the 75-page book, the reason I teach you guys how to make a complete gym for $28 that you can put in your pocket, is because I didn't have this when I was a kid. I didn't have knowledge about biomechanics. I didn't know there was a best movement. I didn't know there was a best way to diet. I didn't know how important sleep was. This is why I have amazing people like Jerry on, because he has inspired me to do this. Jerry, Doug, Bill, Brad, all the people I have on this podcast for you guys, we all want the same thing. We want the truth out there. We want you guys to know and understand how simple it is, and knowledge is power. It can't be taken from you. Once you have it for life. And once you understand the best way to do something, it's there for life. Subscribing to Jerry's, I hate to say newsletter, sorry, but subscribing to Jerry's newsletter, subscribing to Bill Campbell's, his new scientific breakdown he does. I love them because you can read them in chunks. Like you said, you include lots of pictures. At the bottom of the article, if you're not even sure if you want to read it, scroll all the way to the bottom. Jerry includes a nice little summary for you. So you can just read the summary and get the key notes right there. If you are going to read it, just another note on studying in reference to Jerry here, just take your time. Get it up on your phone, go into the bathroom, read for 5 minutes. Next time, pull up the same page, read another 5 minutes. And when you finish reading, ask yourself, what did I just learn? Don't just walk on to the next task. Ask yourself, what did I just learn? At the end of the day, before you go to bed, what did I learn today? Make sure that shit is concrete. But that's it, guys. I'd like to get that out of the way. Jerry, thank you so
One
much.
other
We'll try
thing,
to have you back on soon.
one other thing I'd quickly
Yeah,
add.
yeah.
A lot of people, a lot of subscribers or potential subscribers have sent me emails asking me if there is a what is it, oral or a what is it? What's the word I'm looking for?
Audio.
Audio. That's it, an audio version. And I was going to do that, because I got a lot of requests. But be honest with you, the audio, the way my website is set up, the audio program, if I would have done it, would have cost a fortune, and that would have taken every bit of money I have away. It just wasn't worthwhile, because every time somebody would use it, I'd be charged a couple of bucks. It was ridiculous. But I did some research. I found that there's free programs, even in Microsoft, where you can actually turn it on. It will read you the whole newsletter. It will actually automatically read it. So if you don't want to read it, it can be read to you. So there's your answer.
You can, yeah. I was gonna say there's a lot of programs for that. That was not a surprise to me. I think because I work with deaf clients and blind clients and stuff. But yeah,
Right.
on top of that, I might add, Jerry, maybe you could just try putting it up on YouTube. I'm about to do it for all of my books. I'm just gonna pull up my books on my computer screen. I'm gonna scroll down and read as I scroll, and I'm gonna video record my screen. It'll also give me a chance to go over all the graphs and stuff in my book, and I'll post the videos on YouTube. So really, it's you looking at the book, not necessarily reading it, but you
Yeah.
get to hear my lovely voice reading it. I don't know if that's something you might want to do, but it's really easy. It's just a screen record while you talk, basically.
That's an idea. That's an idea I'd take into account.
Well,
Yeah.
just food for thought, though, Jerry. But we gotta end this for the day.
Hey,
I can't wait to have you back on. Who knows what we'll
right.
chat about next? Maybe psilocybin. But we'll talk about some fun stuff, Jerry. I can't thank you enough for all that you do, for
Sure.
taking the time for this. And please just keep doing what you're doing. You're one of a kind. You're a rare man, and we love you, Jerry. Thank you.
Always a pleasure to talk to you, my friend. Take care.
I hear it all the time. I don't have the money. I don't have the energy. I don't have the time. I don't have the resources. I don't have a gym or a personal trainer. I've tried everything and I can't build muscle and I can't lose fat. Better take drugs, better do a surgery. I have a better idea. How about you simply learn the correct knowledge, and guess what? All you have is everything you already need. Here I am on the beach doing a biomechanically perfect workout for my entire upper body, targeting every single muscle perfectly with maximum effectiveness.
I'm a true champion.